Hello class, this is Mr. Campbell again. Today for our lesson on YouTube, we're going to learn about nationalism in India and Southwest Asia. Okay, so yeah, we get to talk about Ataturk and Gandhi. If you've never heard of those two names before, Gandhi and Ataturk, you will after today. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. As you learned in earlier chapters, the end of World War I broke up the Ottoman Empire. The British Empire, which controlled India, began to show signs of cracking. The weakening of these empires stirred nationalist activity in India, Turkey, and some Southwest Asian countries. Indian nationalism had been growing since the mid 1800s. Many upper class Indians who attended British schools learned European views of nationalism and democracy. They began to apply these political ideas to their own country. Indian nationalism grows. Two groups formed to rid India of foreign rule: the primarily Hindu Indian National Congress, or Congress Party, in 1885, and the Muslim League in 1906. So the thing about India, it's about 70% Hindu, and then I believe it's like 20 something percent Muslim. It's been like that for quite a while. The Muslims have always been a large minority in India. Hindu is the predominant religion, of course, primarily dominant religion in India. But during the nationalist movement, the Hindus and the Muslims, they, for the most part, put aside their differences to focus on their common enemy, the British, and getting the British colonial powers out of India. The word colonialism, it has a different meaning in India, whereas in the United States we hear that word colonial, we're like, oh, the 13 colonies, and the 13 became the 13 states. But colonialism has a more ominous, not a nice ring to it in India. Colonialism is kind of equated with just all these atrocious things that the British did to the Indian inhabitants, basically. One of the things I remember learning from college is that the British Army, or the British companies, they would take over plots of land in India that people in India were using to grow food, and they would take it over and they would, have them grow cotton or tobacco, something that they couldn't eat, and so they would make a profit. The British companies would make a profit, but the people living there who were having to farm it, they ended up starving. So just things like that, unpleasant things like that. Okay, so let's continue. Though deep divisions existed between Hindus and Muslims, they found common ground. They shared the heritage of British rule and an understanding of democratic ideals. These two groups both worked toward the goal of independence from the British. World War I increases nationalist activity. Until World War I, the vast majority of Indians had little interest in nationalism. The situation changed as over 1 million Indians enlisted in the British Army. In return for their service, the British government promised reforms that would eventually lead to self-government. In 1918, Indian troops returned home from the war. They expected Britain to fulfill its promise. Instead, they were once again treated as second-class citizens. Radical nationalists carried out acts of violence to show their hatred of British rule. To curb dissent, in 1919, the British passed the Rowlatt Acts. These laws allowed the government to jail protesters without trial for as long as 2 years. To Western-educated Indians, denial of a trial by jury violated their individual rights. The Amritsar Massacre. To protest the Rowlatt Acts, around 10,000 Hindus and Muslims flocked to Amritsar, a major city in the Punjab, in the spring of 1919. At a huge festival in an enclosed square, they intended to fast and pray and to listen to political speeches. The demonstration, viewed as a nationalist outburst, alarmed the British. They were especially concerned about the alliance of Hindus and Muslims. So that was another way the Brits could maintain power over India, was by sort of poisoning the two sides against each other. If they kept the two sides fighting, then the Brits could always justify their existence of being there as like the peacekeeper, the pacifier, in that situation. Okay, so most people at the gathering were unaware that the British government had banned public meetings. However, the British commander at Amritsar believed they were openly defying the ban. He ordered his troops to fire on the crowd without warning. The shooting in the enclosed courtyard continued for 10 minutes. Official reports showed nearly 400 Indians died and about 1,200 were wounded. Others estimate the numbers were higher. News of the slaughter, called the Amritsar Massacre, sparked an explosion of anger across India. Almost overnight, millions of Indians changed from loyal British subjects into nationalists. These Indians demanded independence. Yeah, so the Amritsar massacre was just totally horrific and unacceptable. The commanding officer who just ordered the soldiers to fire point blank range on innocent men, women, and children, it was just completely absurd. And so I think the commanding officer was reprimanded, meaning he went before a tribunal of the military officers, and they, I guess they kind of scolded him, but I don't think anything serious really happened to him discipline wise. That was it. Okay. So, Gandhi's tactics of nonviolence. The massacre at Amritsar set the stage for Mohandas K. Gandhi to emerge as the leader of the independence movement. Gandhi's strategy for battling injustice and leading resistance to political oppression evolved from his deeply religious approach to political activity. His teachings blended ideas from Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity. Gandhi attracted millions of followers who called him the Mahatma, meaning great soul. Non-cooperation. When the British failed to punish the officers responsible for the Amritsar massacre, Gandhi urged the Indian National Congress to follow a policy of non-cooperation with the British government. In 1920, the Congress Party endorsed civil disobedience, the deliberate and public refusal to obey an unjust law, and nonviolence as the means to achieve independence. So I'm going to reread the definition for civil disobedience because I want everybody to remember that. Civil disobedience. That's one of those words you have to know for the STAR test for U.S. history because it's what Martin Luther King, it's the tactic Martin Luther King Jr. employs in the African American civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. And of course, Gandhi was the inspiration for that. Civil disobedience, the deliberate and public refusal to obey an unjust law, and nonviolence as the means to achieve independence. Gandhi then launched his campaign of civil disobedience to weaken the British government's authority and economic power over India. Boycotts. Gandhi called on Indians to refuse to buy British goods, attend government schools, pay British taxes, or vote in elections. Gandhi staged a successful boycott of British cloth, a source of wealth for the British. He urged all Indians to weave their own cloth. Gandhi himself devoted 2 hours each day to spinning his own yarn on a simple hand wheel. He wore only homespun cloth and encouraged Indians to follow his example. As a result of the boycott, the sale of British cloth in India dropped sharply. So it was kind of unfair that the cotton was grown in India, then the cotton was shipped to Great Britain where it was made in the factories, and then it was sold back to the Indians for triple the price of the cotton. And so they realized they were, if they hit them where it hurt, the textile industry, the British would start to take notice of the Indians' demands for independence. That's why also the cotton spinning wheel, it's on the Indian flag, the flag of India today. And, there's the famous picture of Gandhi. I'll show you the picture here. Here's the famous picture of Gandhi with the cotton weaving cloth. I'm sorry, the cotton weaver and the cloth. Yeah. Okay. So, strikes and demonstrations. Gandhi's weapon of civil disobedience took an economic toll on the British. They struggled to keep trains running, factories operating, and overcrowded jails from bursting. Throughout 1920, the British arrested thousands of Indians who had participated in strikes and demonstrations, but despite Gandhi's pleas for nonviolence, protests often led to riots. The Salt March. In 1930, Gandhi organized a demonstration to defy the hated Salt Acts. According to these British laws, Indians could buy salt from no other source but the government. They also had to pay sales tax on salt. To show their opposition, Gandhi and his followers walked about 240 miles to the seacoast. There they began to make their own salt by collecting seawater and letting it evaporate. This peaceful protest was called the Salt March. Soon afterward, some demonstrators planned a march to a site where the British government processed salt. They intended to shut his salt works down. Police officers with steel-tipped clubs attacked the demonstrators. An American journalist was an eyewitness to the event. He described the sickening whacks of clubs on unprotected skulls and people writhing in pain with fractured skulls or broken shoulders. Still, the people continued to march peacefully, refusing to defend themselves against their attackers. Newspapers across the globe carried the journalist's story, which won worldwide support for Gandhi's independence movement. More demonstrations against the salt tax took place throughout India. Eventually, about 60,000 people, including Gandhi, were arrested. So the tactic of nonviolence, basically not retaliating violently when somebody attacked them, was an effective tactic because the newspapers reported it to the world, and so it showed the Indians rightfully as the victims, who were not violently taking revenge against the British, and it made the British soldiers, the British colonial powers, look extremely bad in the eyes of the public. Okay, Britain grants limited self rule. Gandhi and his followers gradually reaped the rewards of their civil disobedience campaigns and gained greater political power for the Indian people. In 1935, the British Parliament passed the Government of India Act. It provided local self government and limited democratic elections, but not total independence. However, the Government of India Act also fueled mounting tensions between Muslims and Hindus. These two groups had conflicting visions of India's future as an independent nation. Indian Muslims, outnumbered by Hindus, feared that Hindus would control India if it won independence. In chapter 34, you will read about the outcome of India's bid for independence. So, Gandhi wanted to be the great peacemaker between the Hindus and the Muslims. If you've ever watched the famous film by Richard Attenborough, the movie about Gandhi, where Gandhi is portrayed by the actor Ben Kingsley, you will have learned that when Gandhi was growing up as a Hindu, when he went to Hindu temple, I'm not even sure the word for it, the Hindu priest, he would read from the Quran and the Hindu Bible, and he would read it both, even though the Quran is in Islam, he would read from both religions, because that was kind of the mentality Gandhi had. I mean, that was kind of the mentality the people in his village had, was this more of a Unitarian Universalist view of God. But nevertheless, we're going to learn later in world history about the partition of India and Pakistan, how Pakistan is going to split from India, because the Muslims in India, they fear being dominated by a completely Hindu government. So that's why Pakistan splits from India. Pakistan is basically Muslim India at that time, and so many Muslims living in India, they migrate to Pakistan, and then Hindus living in Pakistan, many of them migrate to India. Okay, so we're gonna switch gears just a little bit. With the remaining time, we're going to talk about nationalism in Southwest Asia, meaning Turkey, what's modern day Turkey. So let me start here. The breakup of the Ottoman Empire and growing Western political and economic interest in Southwest Asia spurred the rise of nationalism in this region. Just as the people of India fought to have their own nation after World War I, the people of Southwest Asia also launched independence movements to rid themselves of imperial rulers. At the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire was forced to give up all its territories except Turkey. Turkish lands included the old Turkish homeland of Anatolia and a small strip of land around Istanbul. In 1919, Greek soldiers invaded Turkey and threatened to conquer it. The Turkish Sultan was powerless to stop the Greeks. However, in 1922, a brilliant commander, Mustafa Kemal, also known as Ataturk, successfully led Turkish nationalists in fighting back the Greeks and their British backers. After winning a peace, the nationalists overthrew the last Ottoman Sultan. In 1923, Kemal, aka Ataturk, became the president of the new Republic of Turkey, the first republic in Southwest Asia. To achieve his goal of transforming Turkey into a modern nation, he ushered in these sweeping reforms: separated the laws of Islam from the laws of the nation, abolished religious courts and created a new legal system based on European law, granted women the right to vote and to hold public office, launched government-funded programs to industrialize Turkey and to spur economic growth. Kemal died in 1938. From his leadership, Turkey gained a new sense of its national identity. His influence was so strong that the Turkish people gave him the name Ataturk, meaning father of the Turks. Okay, so Ataturk is an interesting case. If you go to Turkey today, if you go to the parliament, women politicians in the Turkish parliament, they're not allowed to wear the head veil called the hijab. They're not allowed to wear it in the parliament. It's because Turkey wants to be officially a secular nation and not overrun by Islamic conservatives or religious fanatics. I mean, they do have those things in their country, but they want to be seen as modernized and secularized. And they have Ataturk to thank for that. So One of the other interesting things, if you go to Turkey, you'll notice that they use the same alphabet that we do. They use the Roman alphabet. They used to have that like Arabic looking script that they would write, but after when Ataturk took over Turkey, he modernized the alphabet as well, and that was done for business purposes as well as modernization. Okay, that's all I have for today. Appreciate you guys listening again, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.